the University of Denver, from the School of International Studies and the School of Social Work, and also the Denver Justice and Peace Committee, the DJPC in Denver. And there were 15 of us, and we four opted to write on our experience. We were so much affected by this tour, by the various things we heard, the communities we visited, that we wanted to move beyond that and do some writing. And so we've come together with 4 pieces. The one that I'm going to start out with has to do with mining law. I'm going to talk about the evolution of mining law in Mexico and the introduction of something called new extractivism, which is sort of a left-wing response to neoliberalism, and what that means, how the law has been shaped, and how that has geared up increasing investments in mining, but has also had an adverse impact on mining communities themselves. And then that will be followed by a presentation by Amy Sawada here, who is going to talk about, specifically about some of those adverse effects, contamination of the drinking water, the other sources of water, the natural environment. She did some personal interviews with people there and has done some further exploration and brings forth evidence that, in fact, some of the adverse effects that are occurring are attributable to mining. And then we have Victoria Watson at the end here, who's going to talk about the ejido, its history, and how that has that social form, that community form of production is beginning to disintegrate, the impacts that that has had on communities themselves, and more specifically women. And then we close with Lorena Garmar here, who is going to talk about what Chiapas taught us. We went down, we observed a lot of really bad news while we were there, but there was good news too. There was some a lot of evidence of social forms and value systems that were very inspirational, that we can kind of absorb, hear, or learn from, but also, more specifically, the values of the EZLN, the Zapatistas, who are now governing a portion of Chiapas, a fairly significant portion. So I'll begin. We brought PowerPoint. We have maps. I know that most of you, if not all of you, know where Chiapas is. You can see there that it is bounded by Guatemala and the Pacific Ocean. It is the southernmost state in Mexico. To get into mining law and the incentives for mining, after the revolution in 1910, mining and natural resources generally were under the auspices of the state. They were considered a national heritage, and it was the state's role to dispense and to determine how they were going to be used. But they were nationally owned. By 1982, there was an economic crisis, a severe economic crisis in Mexico. Oil prices were falling, and inflation was on the rise, and there were some other tremendous economic difficulties. And the country declared default. They just said, we can, on the national the debt, and said, we can no longer pay this debt. We're sorry. We know you owe a lot of money, but it's just not coming. We could dig up everything we had, and we wouldn't be able to pay you off. So the banks went to the IMF and the World Bank and the American Development Bank and sought help. These various international financial institutions stepped in and said, let's work out a deal. And they rolled over some of the debt, they forgave some of the debt, they created new terms, but in return for the loans that the Mexican government received, the agreement was that neoliberalism would be adopted, which meant lowering tariffs drastically, opening the door for new levels of foreign ownership of new natural resources, a breakdown of the ejido system, which was the communal system of ownership, and collective farming more generally. There was a real intensive period of reform between 1988 and 1996, and this included Article 6 of the 1992 mining law, which said specifically that mining activities will be given preference over any other use or productive utilization of the land. Article 27 of the Constitution was revised to end the ejido system and to allow the buying and selling of ejido lands. There was much more freedom that was given to mining companies in exploring and extracting minerals. Full foreign ownership was now allowed of natural resources. All you had to do was establish a mailing address inside of Mexico. The Foreign Investment Law of 1996 endowed foreign companies with all rights and privileges equal to those of Mexican companies. Mexican concession periods were extended from 25 years to 50 years. Taxes were reduced. And very importantly, in 1999, the granting of mining concessions no longer had to include a public hearing. So this meant that people living in the areas where mining was going to take place were very often not informed that there was going to be a mine nearby until the operation was underway. Now, it's important to know that mining has changed. You know, there was a time when mining was all underground. It was done with very simple technologies. Today, you have much more sophisticated technologies that involve the application of toxic minerals or toxic metals like arsenic and cyanide and so forth, mercury. These things, these various chemicals, are supposed to be stored securely in tailings ponds, but they have a tendency to leak. When you have a hard rain, for instance, you can have earthquakes, you can have other things that happen that cause leaks, and in fact, leaks are pretty frequent. The moderating process, the monitoring process for the mining processes, mining projects, is not always very thorough. So keeping track of what's happening when it comes to disposing of waste is also a challenge. The top beneficiaries of mining in Mexico today include the owners of mines, of Mexican-owned mines. The owner of the firm Grupo Mexico is the third richest man in the country. The owner of Industrias Peñoles is the second richest man in the country. And Carlos Slim, who is one of the wealthiest men in the world, is owner of Minero Frisco. This is what mining has done for an elite in Mexico. It has created mass fortunes. And at the same time, the ones who are paying the greatest price are the smallholders and cooperative farmers, including indigenous communities. The federal government has the authority to dispossess them of their lands. Now, this is all neoliberalism. This is all what has been projected by the more conservative parties, not just in Mexico, but throughout Latin America. It is conservative parties, who have adopted neoliberal reforms. For a long time, the left stood on the sidelines and said, we are for diversification, we are for lifting the floor against poverty, we are for making sure that everybody lives well in the country. But once they got into power, and they did. By the early 2000s, we saw leftist parties winning the top offices in the land in Brazil and Ecuador and Bolivia. And it was 2012 that the PRI came back into the picture in Mexico, the PRI being traditionally a socialist party. And they elected, of course, Federico Peña Nieto. Oh, excuse me, Enrique. With that, they decided that they were going to try to revive mining. And here you see that investments in mining, of course, climbed very quickly. Between 2005, there's a dip during the subprime crisis, and then there's a revival in 2012. And then there's a decline again. And this is the point at which the concern is by the PRI in how to revive mining. And so they adopt the philosophy of new extractivism, which is the left's response. Instead of making lots of changes, the left embraces new extractivism, or extractivism itself, the idea that you're going to produce raw materials, we're going to produce various minerals, gold, silver, lead, etc., and as well as oil and gas. We're going to do really what the right has been doing, but we are going to make sure that we have programs, that we use some of the proceeds of these investments and apply them to social programs, schools, hospitals, public infrastructure, various kinds of things. And also, there are very explicit rules about making sure that the environment is preserved, that it is not contaminated. The 2014 amendment to the federal law said mineral extraction must be done carefully, so when it is depleted, there is no devastated land, no polluted water, no hazardous waste in high-risk sites. The Sustainable Development Fund, which was the fund where they collected the extra taxes, and these were to be disseminated for purposes of social programs and so forth, describes the projects as based on appropriate measures that preserve the ecological balance, protect the environment, and use natural resources so as not to compromise the satisfaction of the needs of future generations. And then Peña Nieto himself says that Mexico had reached a positive moment in which recent reforms, he said, have been designed to increase economic growth and improve well-being of millions of Mexicans, strengthening the South and the West, which would include Chiapas, in relation to mining activities. And these kinds of pronouncements appear in the government magazines put out by the Ministry of the Economy. They feature what a new world it is, and how mining has become more sustainable and more responsible, and that the environment is carefully protected. All the processes are undertaken in a very sustainable manner. So you see this message being repeated over and over and over again. And they were successful in the last couple of years in bringing back mining, increasing mining investments. Here's where we visited. We went to Soconusco, which is that most southern region of Chiapas. And let me just give you a map produced by the government, by the Ministry of the Economy, where you can see, in conjunction with the Geological Service of that country, they have mapped out the concessions that will, for exploitation, for mining exploitation, by municipality in Chiapas. So you see on the northern and eastern side, not much has happened there, but on the west and the south, you see that that's where you have intensive mining going on. This area right here, where it's dark, and this is perhaps certainly one of the most intensively mined areas, is where we visited. That's where Escuintla and Acacoyagua are located. You can see the place we visited is an intensively mined area, and that has rapidly increased, even just in the last couple of years. We've seen an expansion of mining, a tremendous expansion in the area of Soconusco. But the government definitely has the intention, and here's a three-way map. It, again, kind of just shows them in comparison. You can see Soconusco on the right, you can see the mining concessions on the left, and then you can see the area here of Escuintla and Acacoyagua, the two municipalities that we were able to visit. In the area, in Chiapas as a whole, about 20% of the land has come under concession to mining companies. They mine gold, silver, copper, lead, zinc, titanium, iron, and barite. And 99 active mining concessions were granted by the federal government in Chiapas just in the first 8 months of 2015, with about 44 of those located in Soconusco. So you can see it is definitely a targeted area. A couple of the other presentations are going to give you the problems that we encountered. Before I close, I just want to say that these two communities have formed a defense organization, the Defense of Soconusco, or the FPDS, and they are demanding closure of about 14 different concessions in the area. And at the same time, they have joined with other communities in a broad effort to bring an end to mining or to reconsider mining. They've also engaged at a national level on pushing for alternative development strategies in the country where they aren't constantly dealing with mines and the problems that they form. Finally, in this map here, I just want to point out the areas in the north and the east are areas that are largely under the control of the EZLN or the Zapatistas. As you know, I'm sure they had an uprising in 1994 and took control. And a chief feature of their philosophy is that local people, local communities should have the power to make decisions about how their land is going to be used. And it does appear that they have been fairly effective in fending off this increasing pattern of mining projects in Chiapas. So I'll leave it there and turn